Many people have been closely following the 8-Bit Guy's Commander x16 project. The idea of a modern 8-bit computer sparked a lot of interest, and it led to other similar but incompatible 8-bit computers. But not anymore. This is the OtterX, a fully compatible, open-source Commander x16 clone. And today, we're going to build one and check it out. I love the 8-bit computing era. Yeah, those machines are less powerful, but the constraints are what drives innovation and creativity. So when I see projects like the Commander x16, the Cerberus, or the Phoenix, I get quite excited. To be honest, I intended to buy a Commander x16 when the developer edition was first announced. But two things caused me to reconsider. First was the initial price. While many folks wouldn't bat an eye at spending $500 for the x16, I just wasn't ready to spend that much money for a project that I didn't have a lot of confidence in at the time. But the second challenge for me was the lack of a DIY version. If you've been watching this channel for a while, then you know how much I enjoy building these projects myself, so I usually prefer that option when it's available. And if you're like me and love making your own hardware, then you're definitely going to want to know about today's sponsor, PCBWay. I regularly use PCBWay to fabricate boards for my projects. I'm always impressed with the board quality, and their support folks are very nice and super helpful if you have trouble with the ordering process. Recently on this channel, I've used their 3D printing services for high-quality, well-finished 3D printed parts, and they always look great. And right now, PCBWay is celebrating their 11th anniversary. As part of the celebration, they have a bunch of great coupon codes available for the next couple of weeks, as well as several other discounts on services like CNC machining, 3D printing, and more. So if you've been putting off that DIY electronics project, then what are you waiting for? Now's the time to take advantage of PCBWay's 11th anniversary coupons and get some boards made. Thank you for supporting PCBWay, and thanks PCBWay for supporting this channel. So a couple of months ago, I came across the OtterX. Now that project name may not sound familiar to you, but if you've been following the Commander x16, then the name of the designer might ring a bell. This board was designed by a fellow named Joe Burks, also known as Wavicle. Joe's been an active contributor to the Commander x16 community for quite a while. In fact, the OtterX was mentioned in a Commander x16 update video a couple years ago.
So this is another Commander x16, and this is actually made by Wavicle. And it basically boils down to the fact that he got tired of waiting for us to produce one, and it is mostly an open source project, so he just produced his own. Of course, you won't actually be able to buy one of these, at least not anytime soon, but if you want to build your own, well, there's always that option as well.
Well, back then you couldn't buy it, but now you can. You can purchase the OtterX as a do-it-yourself kit for $275. And if DIY isn't your thing, then you can go the other route and buy it pre-assembled. If you do, that'll cost you an extra $75, and that'll put the price for the OtterX in the same ballpark as the official Commander x16 developer hardware. I suspect that most people, though, would probably want to buy the kit, just for the fun of doing a project like this. Joe has the assembly manual online, so you'll definitely want to make sure you read that and follow it. In the kit, you'll find the OtterX PCB. You'll notice that it's well labeled and in a mini ITX form factor, which is quite a bit smaller than the Commander x16 hardware. You'll also find several bags of components. This bag is filled with various capacitors. And this one contains a bunch of resistors. We also have some headers and connectors. There are 2 Super NES controller ports. This bag has some hardware and miscellaneous components. There's also an IEC port connector. And here we have the Vera X video card, which we'll talk about more in just a bit. And we also have these two audio boards. We'll come back to these shortly as well. This kit also included a bodge board, which needs to be installed for cartridge support to work. And finally, we have a box of chips and sockets. Now, because this is such a large soldering project, I'm not going to walk you through it step by step like I normally would. But honestly, there's not a lot to it. It's not a complicated build, it's just a lengthy one. Alright, I've got a lot of soldering to do, so relax and enjoy this OtterX soldering montage. Alright, before we fire it up and check it out, let's take a closer look at the hardware. It would take me a long time to walk through each and every chip with you, so I'll instead just point out a few of the more interesting pieces. You'll notice, by the way, that the silkscreen on this PCB is very well labeled. Joe did a great job with the organization of the components. You can easily tell what each section of the board does. The main feature of the OtterX is, of course, the 6502 CPU. Unlike the recently deceased Z80, this chip is still being manufactured by Western Design Center, so even though it's nearly 50 years old, you can still buy these chips new. Now, you'll notice that this chip is socketed, and that's because the OtterX does support an upgrade to the 6502's 16-bit brother, the 65816. All you need to do is insert the 816, and you're up and running. But swapping back and forth between CPUs can be a bit inconvenient. So Joe designed this really neat CPU switcher that fits in a DIP40 socket. It has both a 6502 and a 6518 on board, and you can switch between them by simply moving this jumper. Right next to the CPU is our ROM chip, and that contains the Commander x16 kernel. The system does support onboard flashing, but if you needed to, you could pull the chip out and flash it with an external programmer. On the other side of the CPU, you'll find two memory chips. The one on the far left is 64 kilobytes of RAM. The OtterX refers to this as fixed RAM, but the Commander x16 calls it low RAM. This is the memory that's always available in the lower region of the x16's memory map. But you'll notice that there's also an 8 kilobyte region of memory called high RAM, which is banked. What you can do here is put an additional larger memory chip on the board, such as a 512 kilobyte chip. And then if you divide that chip up into several 8 kilobyte sections, you can then map different portions of that memory chip into this high RAM portion of the memory map. And that's exactly what this other memory chip does, which is labeled as banked RAM on the PCB. For music, the Commander X16 uses a neat FM synthesizer chip called the Yamaha YM2151, which is also known as the OPM. Now, this chip is no longer produced, so even though you can find a few here and there, it's difficult to acquire them in any sort of mass quantity. To solve that problem, Joe designed this little PCB, which he calls the OPM 2151. This is a drop-in replacement that uses a lattice ICE40 FPGA to synthesize the original YM2151. The OPM also requires an I2S DAC to go along with it in order to turn the digital audio it produces into an analog signal. This DAC chip, the Yamaha YM3012, can also be challenging to find. So there's also a replacement chip for that, which uses an off-the-shelf DAC. Now, here at the top of the board, you'll notice a header labeled Vera Video and Audio. This is for the video card used by the OtterX, which is the same adapter that the official Commander X16 hardware uses. This is called the Vera, and it's designed by Frank Vandenhoef. Frank developed this video adapter for the Commander X16, but really you could use it in any project. The Vera also uses a lattice ICE40 FPGA, and it can output video through VGA, composite, S-Video, or even RGB. There's 128 kilobytes of video memory, and it offers 8 different modes, 2 of which are text modes, 3 modes for tile graphics, and 3 modes for bitmap graphics. Along with the video signal, the Vera also has a 16-channel sound generator built in. Similar to 8-bit audio processors of the era, each channel can produce a pulse, sawtooth, or a triangle wave, or it can produce noise. And in addition to the wave generator, there's also a PCM playback system, so you can feed it audio samples to play as well. One final thing that I want to point out about the Vera is that it provides the system with access to an SD card for storage. To do this, there's a set of SPI registers which you can use to read and write data directly with the card. Now, the Vera is an open source project, so Joe created his own version that he calls the Vera X. Joe's version improves on the design in a couple of different ways, and one of them being this peripheral header, which breaks out the audio and video signal for future expansion capabilities. The Vera is attached to the OtterX by plugging it into the header and fastening it with 4 screws. Now, I don't want to leave the OtterX out and exposed to the elements. Since the board's in a mini ITX form factor, it could fit into a standard mini ITX case. But I felt like it really needed a case of its own, so I created this one. If you want to print one yourself, or have PCBWay make one for you, the link to the 3D model is in this video's description. To install the OtterX, we first need to screw it into the case. For power, it uses an ATX power connector, but we don't need a massive ATX power supply, so I'm just using this Pico PSU that I already had from another project. I also bought this front case power button, and it just plugs into the front panel header here on the board. Alright, it's time to fire it up and check it out. Well, it does look like it works. We have the Commander X16 boot screen here, and it's telling me that it's running version 48 of the kernel. It also looks like it recognizes both the fixed RAM and the 512 kilobytes of banked RAM that's installed. Now, the X16 is sort of Commodore-like in its operation. You can run different DOS commands to do things like list the files on the SD card and launch programs. And it's fully compatible with Commodore BASIC. but I really like this file manager, which just makes it a little easier to navigate the disk. Plus, it reminds me a lot of Norton Commander from back in the day. Well, let's go ahead and check out that OPM replacement chip. For this, I'm going to use a music player called Melodious. And I'll load up a track that uses all 8 of the OPM chip's channels. Well, as you can tell, it sounds great. I do think this is a good alternative to using a real YM2151. Okay, let's try out something that puts the Vera card to use. Here's the second reality demo that was showcased on the Commander x16 last year at VCF. I think this is a good example of some of the effects that you can pull off on this system. There does seem to be a fairly active community of developers writing games and apps, which is great to see. Someone even made an app that converts video files into a format that's playable on the x16.
Cyclone 5 dev boards are taking the Mr. FPGA community by storm. QM-Tex board is available now for $100 US.
And of course, we need to test out some games. Planet x16 makes use of the mouse, so we'll try that first. It's a little more sensitive than I like, but the mouse works well, and Planet x16 runs great on the OtterX. Okay, now let's try out the gamepad support. I'll first plug a Super NES controller into the Player 1 port in the back. And let's try it out with Pet Ski Robots. I haven't played too much of this game, but I do really like it. And it looks and sounds great on the OtterX. Next, I want to try out something different. As you may be aware, Nintendo's 2A03 chip also uses a 6502 CPU. And there's been some experimental work to port some Nintendo games over to the Commander x16. So here's the original Super Mario Bros., which was ported over by Mooing Lemur. Even though this is the original game, certain aspects of it had to be modified, and one of those is its memory layout. We can illustrate this by exploiting a glitch in the game that takes you to the minus world. When doing this on a real Nintendo, you're taken to a water level that continuously loops. But on the version ported over to the Commander x16, you get an entirely different level. And this is due to a difference in the memory layout. Aside from this, there have also been a couple other games ported over as well, including Super Mario Bros. 3. Now, this is all very impressive, but there's one other demo that I think is really interesting, and it won't run on the 512 kilobytes of banked memory that's built into the board. Instead, we'll need to install a memory expansion upgrade, which Joe sent over with my order. This kit is very simple to put together. It consists of 3 memory chips, an address decoder, a mail header, and some decoupling caps. And when installing it, we need to switch this jumper over so the OtterX routes the chip select logic over to the expansion card's address decoder. Now, when turning the OtterX on, we see a full 2 megabytes of RAM. Okay, now let's run this program by KGSWS, which I came across in the Commander x16 Discord server. Yep, that's right. This is a 3D engine running on the Commander x16 kernel. I know the code for the graphics is probably running on the Vera, but it's still an impressive proof of concept. Overall, I think the OtterX is a neat open source alternative to the Commander x16 hardware. I've spent a healthy amount of time with it, and it runs all the x16 software that I've thrown at it without any issues. And I didn't talk about this much in this video, but Joe made lots of little improvements over the original x16 hardware. These are things like cleaner power domain isolation, improved EMC design, better signal integrity, a real-time clock battery that doesn't drain when the system's powered off but still plugged in. Nothing major, but lots of little things. That said, there are some areas that the OtterX falls short in, and they're primarily due to the smaller footprint on the mainboard. With less room on the board, components are closer together, so they're a little harder to work with. Also, there's only room for one expansion slot, whereas the Commander x16 hardware has 4. And if you have the memory expansion module installed, you can't fit an enclosed cartridge into that expansion slot. Regardless, at $275 for the kit, it's a great option for getting into the Commander x16 project, if you don't mind going the DIY route. And when you do, be prepared to spend at least a few hours assembling the board. It took me about 5 hours in total, and I've done a bunch of other large-scale builds like this in the past. That said, I still made a few mistakes along the way, so it's important to read the manual and take your time so you don't miss anything. And definitely use the interactive BOM. This tool made the process so simple. You don't have to hunt around the board looking for silkscreen labels. You just click on the part you're on, and the tool shows you exactly where it goes. If you want to purchase an OtterX, you'll find a link to Joe's Tindy store in this video's description. Keep in mind that Joe is a one-man shop, so he doesn't keep a massive inventory of these kits on hand. Because Joe did open source the design, you could go the complete DIY route and order a run of PCBs directly from PCBWay. While that'll get you the board, you do need to keep in mind that you'd still need to source all the individual components on your own. If you decide to go that route, I'd still recommend buying the Vera X and the OPM chip from Joe. He has plenty of those on hand, and it'll save you some trouble. Okay, that's it for today. Leave a comment and let me know what you think of the OtterX and the Commander x16 ecosystem overall. Alright, I'll see you next time. But, as always, until then, go make something cool.